Okay, kia ora everyone. A couple of people might come in a bit later, but we'll just get started. So kia ora and welcome to the Bay of Plenty Regional Environment Network sessions online from the 14th to the 21st of September. My name is Liesl and I'm the Projects Manager for EnviroHub Bay of Plenty. This event is an annual collaboration between New Zealand Landcare Trust and EnviroHub to support environmental groups across the Bay of Plenty. This year, after 2 in-person event cancellations due to COVID-19, we are taking the Regional Environment Network Hui online for a week of lunchtime inspirational korero. We hope you have a delicious kai and a cuppa with you today and have registered for our other fantastic Regional Environment Network sessions over the coming week. These sessions will be recorded and the links will be available for viewing on the EnviroHub and New Zealand Landcare Trust websites. Just a couple of pieces of Zoom etiquette before we start. We just ask that you keep yourself on mute to avoid background noises and interruptions during the presentation. And if you would like to write your questions in the chat function to everyone, and then Glenn will answer these at the end of the presentation. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Glen Crowther on the circular economy and the Bay of Plenty. Glen Crowther has been Sustainable Business Network's Bay of Plenty Regional Manager for the past 5 years. He has worked for the past 2 decades in education and business and the community sector, and has learnt that the best way to apply sustainability principles is in the context of local communities and their needs. Glen believes that innovative businesses work closely with local communities Glen believes that innovative businesses working closely with local communities can lead the transition to a new economic paradigm. He works with businesses and community networks in the Bay to help facilitate that process. So over to you, Glen.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much, Liesl, and thanks for inviting me to present in this series. I guess I'll make it fairly informal, seeing there's an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but if you have any sort of burning question as they come up, I'll do my best to look into the chat session, but if I don't catch it at the time, I'll have a look at the chat afterwards and try to answer all the questions you might have. Now, if I just get into the screen sharing, so hopefully this will work. Onto, where are we? Oh, there. Now, is that, can someone give me the thumbs up if that's clear? Brilliant. Big thumbs up from Liesl. Thank you. So today, we're going to just talk a little bit about the circular economy, which has been given the name Ohanga Miao Miao, which is, Ohanga is the economy, and so I think it was about a year or so ago that Ministry for the Environment wanted a name in Te Reo to kind of give it a bit of a local flavour for people in Aotearoa. So they came up with that name and held a big Pacific Circular Economy Summit in Rotorua. So the Bay of Plenty was really at the heart of that. It was really sort of a big event with a few hundred people there, and it was run by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in collaboration with a lot of New Zealand partners. So that was a big kickoff. But since then, I think it's gone along in fits and starts, and I think now's the time to really look into the circular economy and all the benefits it can offer. Which raises the first question, which is, what is a circular economy? And probably the simplest diagram you'll see around it is that there is the traditional sort of, when I say traditional, the modern economy, which is linear economy, where you can just use things and throw them out at the end and go and get something else. And that is really quite a new way of approaching life, but it is causing all the untold damage that you'd all know about it. Recycling economy is the name given to where you have interventions through various recycling processes, and it is certainly a lot better than just disposing of waste in a landfill. But circular economy is saying, let's redesign systems so we don't actually have to use disposal techniques at all. And that means looking at some key principles. And the three that I'd highlight from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are the leading researchers in the world on this, they say the first thing is to design out pollution, waste. Second thing is to try to keep the various materials in use as much as possible. And the third is to regenerate the natural systems as opposed to the sort of technical materials. And as you see in this slightly more detailed slide, that you can break down things into technical and biological materials. And that's a really important concept, just to work your way through at the start, so that whenever you have a particular business or some kind of part of the economy that you're trying to make circular, you have to think through, do you want it to be, is it mainly part of the bioeconomy, which is biological materials, or is it technical materials mainly? And a classic example might be electronic materials, which currently produce e-waste. And so those things you can't kind of compost a cell phone or a computer, but you can actually return and extract materials from it and remake those kind of appliances. Now, the next slide is just to give you a bit of a feel for the kind of approach that Ellen MacArthur Foundation has used, where you can drill in very deeply into the various components of, on the one side there, the biological materials, and on the other side, the technical. And it's important to say that in both cases, when you produce products or you create economic activity, that it has to be based on renewable sources of energy, because fundamentally, no matter how much we reuse materials or redesign systems, unless we use renewable energy, we're going to run into problems with our CO2 emissions. So that's the other important concept to keep in mind for a circular economy. So I've been working for the last few years for the Sustainable Business Network, and my colleagues in Auckland have been doing a lot of work on the Circular Economy Accelerator, which aims that the goal back about 5 years ago now was for all New Zealanders to thrive in Aotearoa's low carbon circular economy by 2025, which was, as you'd realise, an aspirational goal, but one that was trying to say that the time has really come when we have to really take some action in this regards, because the amount of waste, the amount of CO2 emissions, the impact on our natural environment from some of the farming systems that we've had, all those things mean that we have to actually come up with different ways of really running an economy. So this Circular Economy Accelerator was backed by some foundation funding partners and support partners. And I just wanted to put this slide in because it shows that half of those 6 organisations actually come from the Bay of Plenty. So coupled with the work that Scion is doing in Rotorua and the Pacific Summit being held there for the circular economy last year, it means that here in the Bay of Plenty, we're really right at the heart of some of the early thinking around how you can develop a circular economy in this country. I guess the first thing that Sustainable Business Network, or SBN, did was to look at what we're talking about in terms of the opportunities here, and money talks. So we had to look at what the financial implications were of switching to a circular economy. And in Auckland, we did a piece of work with an economic consultancy who crunched the numbers, and it was a big project, a big scope of work really to try and figure out what a circular economy would look like for Auckland. So they really honed in on things like the construction sector and transport, and even just from a fairly narrow analysis within those sectors, they found that Auckland could gain by $8.8 billion in 1 year by 2030 if they phased in a circular economy over the next decade. And there were large reductions in CO2 emissions as part of that. Yeah, so that's, I just realised, just so you know, I'm not easily seeing my button to click on the chat, so I'll have to just get the questions later, unless I'm directed to do otherwise by Liesl. So, as I said, the construction sector was one of the ones that was looked into in Auckland, and it was interesting that globally, this is just a diagram sort of trying to analyse some of the complexities of construction and all the materials and systems involved. But here in the Bay, at a very sort of practical level, the construction sector would be a huge issue in terms of if we want to look at designing a circular economy, because it's a big user of energy and a producer of waste and CO2 emissions. So one of the first things that SBN did was to look at some practical tools, and we produced a guide to, really it was mainly for retrofitting offices, but also for new builds. And one of our partners, Bay Fair, has done a lot of work in trying to get, in their big project that they've undergone over the last year or two, they've taken a circular economy approach there and massively reduced the amount of waste that's being produced. And so this is just a little guide that's available free online if you know anyone who's wanting to refurbish their office, and it just has some sort of handy tips and links to different organisations that might be able to help. Another area that SBN has honed in on is plastic packaging. It's always ranked very highly in the last, I think, 3 years in New Zealand in terms of a big concern for New Zealanders and New Zealand businesses. And so a number of those big corporates got together with SBN and did some work on what it would mean to redesign plastic packaging to make it more circular. And recently there's been some work done in aquaculture, which is I guess an important industry now in the Bay of Plenty. And I just noticed it was the Deputy Prime Minister was speaking in Tauranga a short time ago, and I went through Red Square listening, and he was talking about the importance of aquaculture to the future of the Bay of Plenty economy. So it is interesting that one of the things that SBN's been involved in proactively with some key players in that sector is to design right from the start so that there is not plastic waste going into the Pacific Ocean, which will hopefully, if more and more people take that approach, it will reduce the impact at the other end where we see these huge mountains of plastic in photos and videos. Product stewardship is a really key concept for a circular economy, and it's really saying that it's up to the manufacturers and distributors of the products to figure out a solution right from the start, as opposed to consumers having to figure out what to do once we use a product and it breaks down. So whether it's, as I say there, whether it's some kind of appliance, or whether it's tyres, or whether it's paint or whatever, there are schemes that have been in place for some time, and a few new ones which have recently been announced by the government. But one of the pieces of work that SBN has done is to try to encourage businesses to set up voluntary product stewardship schemes. And it's just a matter of looking at the products and figuring out what is it that can be done at a practical level to reutilize the product, to extract some value from it, to if necessary, to recycle it, but in some ways to prevent it going into landfill. And so there are a lot of, some of our partners there, like Fuji Xerox, have got systems in place, which means that you don't have to, if you buy a photocopier or rent one, you're not having to throw things away. They can actually have a system in place to reutilize them. So in the Bay of Plenty, I would say there are some great potential, but we're very much in the planning phase as a region, and in particular I'm doing some work now looking at a potential low carbon circular economy project here in the Bay. But when you look around, there are actually some great examples of what what has been done that's probably not been talked about initially as circular economy, but is implementing things with circular principles. And I was really interested, I think it was a year and a bit ago, when someone from Scotland who was doing some work for the government on circular economy, and he came through the Bay of Plenty, and I showed him around, took him to Kawerau, and he said that Kawerau would be right up there with some Scandinavian places as a world-leading example of the circular economy in action. So if you're familiar with Kawerau, you might know how it operates, but certainly there are many people who don't know the amazing things that have been going on there, and it's really looking at development that will create sustainable jobs, that will create good environmental outcomes, good social outcomes, that will minimise waste. That's been a particular priority for the council and their partners there. And it's utilising renewable energy through geothermal and sustainable transport systems, particularly the railway line from Kawerau to Port of Tauranga. And they're really keen, to get some government money in the medium term to electrify that railway line and try to make it even more environmentally friendly. But ultimately, the best quote that I've heard is when one of the staff at Kawerau Council said that their approach to business development is quite simple. If it's sustainable, they welcome the business, and if it's not, well, in his words, if it's not, they tell them to go to Auckland. So, so that's kind of the attitude that's needed, is to say these are some bottom lines, and it's a brilliant example right here in the Bay of Plenty region. I'll just skip through a few other examples too, and then we can have time for some questions. Scion has been doing some really fantastic work, which all fits within what could be called the circular bioeconomy. And we have all these forests that are, the Billion Trees program. There'll be a lot of wood in New Zealand. I hear today that Minister Twyford is talking about the construction sector and other parts of government procurement processes needing to use sustainable materials in building. And so I think, it's interesting to think about what it means to use timber, but also what it means to actually use the products that can be produced from that timber. So science says anything made from fossil fuels today can be made from a tree tomorrow, and indeed can be pretty much made from a tree today, really. Which means you can think of all sorts of things. And a good example that they told me about a couple of years ago was one of the European car makers whose dashboards are made, initially the trials were made using New Zealand pine, and I think they now use European pine to make it. And it just looks like a normal plastic dashboard, but it's a low carbon version, and it doesn't have all the downsides that making it from fossil fuels has. Usefully is a new initiative which has come from Formery, based in Wellington, but Deborah Crow, who some of you know, based in Tauranga, is working with them. And there's an initiative here in Tauranga to look at textile reuse. And so it's particularly targeting initially some of the businesses who have uniforms and other textiles that currently go to landfill. So it's a great example of something at a very practical level which can repurpose the materials that otherwise go to waste. Oops, did I skip? Trevelyan's is one of my favourite examples of business that I know quite well that has increasingly year after year just tried to better itself in terms of its sustainability record. And so they've actually been doing some amazing stuff to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and reduce their waste. So 27% reduction in emissions since their base year, 2010, but the production has grown by over 50%. So they've actually had a 72% reduction in per tray in their CO2 emissions. And in terms of waste, excuse me, they're massively down on what they were in 2010. They used to send truckload upon truckload to the landfill, many trucks a week, you know, dozens and dozens of trucks every week during the peak season. Now you can see from some of these stats that only 6.8% of the waste had to go to landfill, and they diverted 900 bins, lots of trailers and bags of organic material, and 3,654 tonnes of reject kiwi fruit sent to food rescue. So all that stuff initially was, you know, pretty much, it would just go to waste, and it's been repurposed. Why Waste is an example of a local based business that takes a product as service approach, which is a key to the circular economy. And it's Leo, who runs that business, decided that it's not the worm farm itself that people want, it's the service of what the worms do. So for a fee, he puts in the bins, takes care of them if they need repairing, if the worms need, you know, something done to get them back into action. So you're actually paying for the service as opposed to worrying about the product, and that way you end up with an end of life story for that product. Goodwood, which repurposes waste wood, based at Mount Maunganui, is another great example of circular economy in action. And one thing that's coming up soon on October the 6th is an initiative that Katikati Taio are doing, which is around organic waste composting. And one of their big goals is to get the circular economy happening in that part of the bay to help, as they say, future-proof the kiwi fruit industry, extract value from the waste streams related to the horticultural sector, and to try and get some benefit for the local economy in the process. So that's a fantastic, it's really like a grassroots, community-led initiative that could have a really positive impact on businesses right across the bay. So last slide, just some strategic goals that I see for the Bay of Plenty if we want a really circular economy. And some of it is the stuff that we've covered just to get more of that happening. But the other things that seem critical are to take a different approach to urban development. I guess less sprawl, better quality housing, smarter transport systems. It's really hard to get around our region, particularly in Tauranga at times. And so trying to cut carbon emissions and look at smarter systems seems critically important. Regenerative food systems, there's a whole piece of work that you could, you know, people get a bit hung up on the word regenerative, but ultimately it's looking at low emissions systems that sequester carbon into the soil and reduce the adverse impacts from agriculture and horticulture. Procurement's a key lever to try and get sustainable procurement policies at our councils, and then looking at the appropriate infrastructure where local government can invest to try to get the right waste infrastructure to minimise waste really, and to implement these the circular economy. So possibly gone a couple of minutes over time. So Lisa, do you want to?
Oh yeah, no, thank you, Glenn. That was very interesting. We just got a couple of questions in the chat.
I'll just get mine.
So Dean Flavel wants to know about the building industry, and has this approach been promoted with the new house builds, considering housing is big in the nation politically?
Yeah, I think it's a real, you know, it's a hot issue and has been for a couple of years, particularly when Kiwi Bill was being talked about more. I don't think anywhere near enough is being done about it, but it was really interesting to hear the Minister today talking about that issue. And yeah, you sort of have to wonder if around election time, we sort of heard about it last election to some extent, and then we're hearing a renewed enthusiasm for it right now, but I'm just not sure. I just want to try and stop my sharing so I can either stop share. Sorry, I just wanted to get back where I can see the questions. Yeah, I'm not sure how committed they will be, but I think it's fundamentally a really important issue, because if you're just, keep on doing the same old thing, we're just going to end up with more and more waste because just more and more people, more and more houses, more and more systems set in place. So now is definitely the time to act, and I think there's the hold up is not what to do or how to do it. The hold up is probably just the initial cost to sort of break through the current systems that are put in place by some of the big construction companies and infrastructure firms.
And Elise had a question about where wire waste was located, but Laura's
So they're located in the Tauranga area, but they operate in Rotorua. So if you Google them, you can actually get in touch. And the last that I heard, I mean, COVID's obviously impacted a lot of businesses, but the last that I've heard is that there were, I think, a number of North Island centres that Leo was catering for, and Auckland had been one of them. I think with the latest lockdown, it probably meant that he had to switch to the systems he'd put in place, some remote worm guidance systems. So I think he's back in action now, certainly for Rotorua. So do get in touch if you want. Any other?
Yeah, can you read the questions, Glenn? Have you found them? Because I can read them out.
Yeah.
Just got another from Dan.
Oh, waste. Yeah. So Scion did a biofuels roadmap. And I guess one of the issues for New Zealand as a whole at the moment is to get its head around, all the decision makers really trying to figure out what fuels are the optimal fuels to use in different situations. So, for instance, in terms of our CO2 emissions, one of the big issues is, should we just switch everything as much as possible to electric? So rail. Then you've got, light vehicles, commercial vehicles, heavy trucks. So some of the arguments are that hydrogen is best placed for heavy transport vehicles, but then you've got others who say that the future potential for hydrogen has been overstated, and that biofuels is actually probably a more realistic pathway. So what Scion found was that if you actually put in place some infrastructure to convert some of the waste wood and waste fibre in New Zealand, especially in the North Island, to biofuels, you could power a lot of the trucking fleet. And where this current government has gone is they're investing with a company initially in Taranaki and then in some other key locations around New Zealand into a network with for hydrogen, and Tauranga is going to be one of the hubs on that network. And I guess it's just a bit of a question mark at the moment as to what's going to be the optimal mix. So there are certain advantages to hydrogen, but there are also disadvantages. And it's not an energy source per se. So you still have to produce the energy to store it in the hydrogen. So some people say biofuels is the perfect answer for New Zealand because we grow lots of trees. So I think this is something over the next couple of years with the Climate Commission and others, they're going to be delving into just which is the optimal pathway for the country.
Cool. And if there's any other questions, people are welcome to just unmute themselves and just talk at this point. Anyone? Otherwise, I think you might have covered everything off for Glenn, for them. Thank you, Glenn. So, yeah, thank you all for attending this Regional Environment Network session, and a big thank you to you, Glenn, today. As always, you have some fantastic statistics that are very compelling, and we're sure that this has helped inspire and educate the viewers. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. So everyone, please don't forget that you can register for our upcoming Regional Environment Network sessions for the rest of the week. They're at 12 p.m. every day. Tomorrow we have Grant Ryan from the Cacophony Project, and he's just presenting on an introduction to the Cacophony Project and what they're doing there. And hopefully we'll see you there. And thank you again, once again, and ka kite.